Today we're exploring a disturbing case from Johns Creek, Georgia, in late August 2020. It involves a seemingly ideal family, hidden secrets, and a sinister murder plot. On the sweltering afternoon of August 28, 2020, Johns Creek, Georgia, was jolted by a horrifying find. Around 3 p.m., Susan Mencago, a close friend of the Frisch family, arrived at their house for a planned visit. Susan, a longtime Johns Creek resident, had been friends with the Frisch family for years and frequently participated in community and church events with Anne Frisch. As Susan approached the house, she noticed an unusual silence. She knocked on the front door but received no reply. Feeling a bit uneasy, she tried the door and found it unlocked. Calling out for Anne and Steven, Susan stepped inside. The house was unnervingly quiet, lacking the usual sounds of family life and showing no sign of anyone being home. Growing more anxious, Susan decided to check the basement, where Steven often worked on his gardening projects. As she went down the stairs, a faint, unsettling odor made her heart race. At the bottom, Susan was met with a horrifying sight. Steven Frisch lay motionless on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. His head was severely injured, and a rope was tightly wrapped around his neck. Beside him, the remote control for the cable box lay covered in blood. Susan's immediate reaction was one of shock and disbelief. She froze for a moment, struggling to grasp the horrific scene. Regaining her composure, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she described the situation to the operator, trying to maintain her calm. Within minutes, sirens blared as police and emergency responders arrived at the Frisch residence. Susan, still in shock, waited outside, watching as the previously peaceful home turned into a major crime scene. The discovery of Steven's body marked the start of a complex and tragic case that would deeply impact the Johns Creek community. Steven Frisch was a 45-year-old husband and father, recognized for his quiet and reserved demeanor. He worked in software design and was esteemed for his meticulous attention to detail and innovative solutions. Steven and his family resided in Johns Creek, Georgia, an affluent suburb of Atlanta known for its welcoming community and excellent schools. Their house, a charming two-story with a front yard frequently adorned with blooming flowers, reflected Steven's love for gardening. He was passionate about his work and often stayed late to refine his designs. His colleagues admired him for his dedication and strong work ethic. Outside of work, Steven found joy in simple pleasures. He loved gardening and spent many weekends caring for his flowers and vegetables. He also enjoyed playing with his two children, a 12-year-old son named Beamer and a 10-year-old daughter named Portia. Steven's relationship with his wife, Anne, appeared ideal to outsiders. They were active in their community and attended church regularly. Anne was known for organizing events and parties, frequently highlighting their seemingly happy family. However, behind closed doors, their marriage faced difficulties. Friends and family described Steven as kind, dependable, and somewhat introverted. He wasn't one to seek attention, preferring quiet moments with his family. Steven dreamed of leaving a lasting legacy through his architectural work and providing a stable, loving home for his children. He frequently mentioned a planned family vacation to Disney World, a trip they had hoped to take later in the year before the COVID-19 pandemic intervened. In the days leading up to his death, Steven had been focused on a major project he hoped would lead to a significant promotion. He was enthusiastic about the future and anticipated celebrating the completion of the project with his family. Despite the pressures of his job, Steven always made time for his children, assisting Beamer with his science projects and reading bedtime stories to Portia. Steven's sudden and violent death left his family and friends in deep shock. The Johns Creek community mourned the loss of a man who was not only a skilled professional but also a devoted father and husband. Steven Frisch's tragic end was a stark contrast to the peaceful life he had worked so hard to build. When the Johns Creek Police Department received Susan Mencago's urgent 911 call on August 28, 2020, they responded promptly. Detective Sheena Hayes, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years of experience, led the team. Known for her sharp instincts and methodical approach, Hayes was committed to uncovering the truth. The police arrived at the Frisch residence within minutes. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with neighbors cautiously peering from behind their curtains, stunned by the unexpected commotion. The house was soon enclosed with yellow police tape, and officers began their investigation. The basement, where Steven Frisch's body was discovered, was a grisly scene. The concrete floor was stained with blood, and Steven's body lay in the center, surrounded by gardening tools and supplies. A blood-covered remote control for the cable box was found near his head, suggesting it had been used to bludgeon him. The rope around his neck was tightly wound, indicating signs of a violent struggle. Detective Hayes and her team carefully combed through the crime scene. They collected fingerprints from the remote control and surrounding surfaces in hopes of finding a match. DNA samples were taken from the rope and any other potential evidence. The team used luminol to detect traces of blood that might have been cleaned, revealing the extent of the violence with a bluish glow. They photographed every angle of the scene to ensure that no detail was missed. Outside the house, a crowd began to gather, drawn by the unfolding events. Local news crews, including those from WSBT, arrived with their cameras rolling, reporting on the shocking murder in the normally quiet suburb. Reporters interviewed neighbors, who voiced their disbelief and sorrow over Steven's death. Meanwhile, inside the house, the investigation pressed on. Detective Hayes observed that, despite the brutal attack, there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that the killer was someone Steven knew and trusted. The police questioned Susan Manchego, who had discovered the body. Still in shock, she detailed her find and provided important information about the Frisch family's recent activities. The police also examined Steven's recent communications. They searched his phone, computer, and social media accounts for clues that might reveal a motive or suspect. Emails, text messages, and recent calls were carefully reviewed for any signs of trouble in Steven's life. Detective Hayes and her team worked late into the night, reconstructing the events leading up to the murder. The evidence from the scene suggested a violent personal attack. As the investigation continued, the police started compiling a list of potential suspects, focusing initially on those closest to Steven. The first suspect the police focused on was Anne Frisch, Steven's wife. At 42, Anne was known for her charismatic and outgoing personality, frequently seen organizing community events and church activities. To neighbors and friends, Anne appeared to be the ideal wife and mother, always cheerful and full of energy. However, the police knew that appearances could be misleading. Detective Sheena Hayes started by interviewing Anne at the police station. Anne seemed deeply upset, her eyes red from crying. She said she had been shopping at the local Whole Foods when the murder happened. She showed her receipt and mentioned she had seen a friend, Martha Green, who could confirm her alibi. However, the police remained skeptical and decided to investigate further. They delved into Anne's background for more information. They discovered that, despite her public image, Anne had been secretly involved in a love affair with a man named Nick Bromley. This new information added complexity to the case. Could the affair have played a role in Steven's murder? Detective Hayes questioned Anne about her relationship with Nick. Anne admitted to the affair, describing the experience as fabulous, but insisted she had no motive to harm Steven. She claimed that, despite being sexually unfulfilled, their marriage was stable and Steven was a good husband and father. During the interrogation, her demeanor was a mix of sadness and defensiveness. Anne appeared genuinely heartbroken over Steven's death, but also wary of the police's suspicions. The police also reviewed Anne's financial records and discovered that Steven had a substantial life insurance policy. With Anne as the primary beneficiary, this discovery raised questions about a possible financial motive. Could Anne have wanted the insurance money to start a new life with Nick? To verify Anne's alibi, Detective Hayes spoke with Martha Green, who confirmed that she had seen Anne at Whole Foods around the time of the murder. However, the timeline was tight, and there remained a possibility that Anne could have been involved. The police reviewed surveillance footage from the store, which showed Anne shopping but did not conclusively prove her innocence. Despite Anne's cooperation, the evidence against her continued to accumulate. Her affair with Nick and the potential financial motive made her a prime suspect. The police kept a close watch on her, searching for any signs of further deception. As the investigation went on, Anne's calm and composed exterior began to show signs of cracking. Anne became increasingly anxious, aware that the police were closely examining her every move. The once vibrant and confident woman now seemed troubled by the weight of her secrets. Nick Bromley, the second suspect, was Anne's lover. At 38, Nick was known for his charm and fitness. He worked as a personal trainer at a local gym and was well liked by his clients. Nick had a reputation as a ladies' man and was frequently seen driving his sleek BMW around Johns Creek. Detective Sheena Hayes brought Nick in for questioning. When he arrived at the police station, he seemed confident and relaxed. Nick denied any involvement in Steven's murder and claimed he had been at the gym during the time of the crime. He even provided the names of several clients who could confirm his alibi. The police decided to investigate Nick's background further and uncovered a history of manipulative behavior. Nick had been involved in several troubled relationships in the past, some of which ended poorly. This history raised the police's suspicions. Could Nick's relationship with Anne have led him to commit murder? Detective Hayes questioned Nick about his affair with Anne. Nick admitted to the relationship but maintained that he had no reason to harm Steven. He stated that while Anne had expressed dissatisfaction with her marriage, she had never mentioned any desire to harm her husband. During the interrogation, Nick was calm, though there was an underlying arrogance in his responses. The police also reviewed Nick's financial records and discovered he was struggling with debt while maintaining a luxurious lifestyle on a $50,000 annual salary. This raised the possibility that Nick might have seen Steven's life insurance money as a solution to his financial problems. Nick, on the other hand, claimed he knew nothing about the insurance policy. To check Nick's alibi, Detective Hayes interviewed his clients, and most of them verified that Nick was at the gym, as he said. However, there was a brief period that couldn't be accounted for. The police reviewed the gym's surveillance footage, which confirmed that Nick was training clients, but there were still some gaps in the timeline that raised questions. As the investigation progressed, Nick's previously confident demeanor started to waver. Nick grew increasingly defensive, especially when the police suggested he might have a financial motive. The atmosphere became tense as Detective Hayes pushed Nick for more information about his relationship with Anne and his actions on the day of the murder. Even though Nick insisted on his innocence, the police continued to harbor doubts. Nick's past manipulative behavior, financial issues, and affair with Anne created a concerning profile. The investigation into Nick Bromley was ongoing, and Detective Hayes knew that finding the truth would demand thorough and persistent effort. On August 30th, 2020, at 2 p.m., under the scorching summer sun, the Johns Creek Police Department discovered a crucial new piece of evidence in the murder case of Steven Frisch. Detective Sheena Hayes got a call from Ashley Martin, a neighbor and friend of Anne's. Ashley reported finding a blood-stained glove in her backyard, which was close to the Frisch residence. Detective Hayes and her team arrived at Ashley's house promptly. Ashley had been gardening when she spotted the glove partially concealed under a bush. His curiosity turned to concern when he noticed the blood. He calmly contacted the police, realizing that this could be important evidence. The police collected the glove and promptly sent it to the forensics lab for DNA testing. Detective Hayes hoped that this new evidence would lead to a breakthrough in the case. In the meantime, her team continued searching the area for any additional items the killer might have left behind. As the forensics team analyzed the glove, Detective Hayes reviewed the case files, seeking connections between the suspects and the newly discovered evidence. Later that evening, the DNA results arrived. The blood on the glove was confirmed to be Steven Frisch's, and the glove also contained DNA from Anne Frisch. This revelation caused a stir in the investigation. Until now, Anne's alibi appeared strong, supported by her friend Martha Green and surveillance footage from Whole Foods. However, finding her DNA on the glove cast doubt on her story. Detective Hayes decided to bring Anne in for further questioning. This time, Anne seemed more anxious. When faced with the evidence, her composure started to break down. She insisted she had no idea how her DNA ended up on the glove and suggested that someone might be trying to frame her. Her voice wavered, and she appeared less assured than before. Meanwhile, the police re-examined Nick Bromley's alibi, looking more closely at the gym's surveillance footage. They discovered that Nick had briefly left the gym during the unaccounted time, which matched the window of opportunity for the murder. With the new evidence implicating Anne and suggesting possible involvement by Nick, the police stepped up their investigation. They reviewed the financial records and communications between Anne and Nick, finding more damaging information. Detective Hayes and her team knew they were getting closer to solving the case, but they needed to piece everything together. The discovery of the glove was a key development, indicating that the murder was planned and that both Anne and Nick were involved. The police realized they needed to quickly gather more evidence to hold the perpetrators accountable. The investigation also considered a third suspect, Ashley Martin, a 35-year-old who was close to Steven Frisch. Ashley worked with Steven on several projects, and was known for her intelligence and supportive nature. She had a reputation for being reliable and had frequently been a confidant for Steven, particularly during his marital issues. There were rumors that Ashley had feelings for Steven, but she never pursued them. On August 31st, 2020, Detective Sheena Hayes asked Ashley to come in for questioning. At 3:01 p.m., Ashley arrived at the police station, appearing calm but clearly anxious. She described her professional relationship with Steven, highlighting their close working relationship and mutual respect. When asked about her feelings for Steven, Ashley admitted she cared for him deeply but insisted she would never harm him. During the interrogation, Ashley revealed a startling secret. She was the birth mother of Steven and Anne's 2 children. Anne was infertile, so Ashley had agreed to carry the children for them. Ashley explained that she had intercourse with Steven while Anne was present, as part of their agreement. She noted that the marriage between Steven and Anne had deteriorated afterward, leading to increased tension. Detective Hayes found Ashley's confession both surprising and intriguing, adding a new dimension to the complex dynamics between Steven and Anne. However, Ashley's motives remained unclear. Could Ashley's involvement with the family have led her to murder Steven? The police investigated her alibi for the day of the murder. Ashley claimed she was at her office, working late on a project. The police confirmed her alibi by checking with her colleagues and reviewing security footage from her office building. Everything checked out, and there was no evidence placing Ashley at the crime scene. Despite her alibi, the police continued to examine Ashley's actions and communications. They reviewed her phone records and emails, searching for any signs of a conspiracy with Anne or Nick. They found numerous messages between Ashley and Steven discussing their children and work, but nothing indicating a plan to kill him. As the investigation into Ashley continued, the police began to view her more as a tragic figure entangled in a complex web of relationships rather than a suspect. She had no financial motive and no clear reason to harm Steven. Her cooperation with the police and her verified alibi gradually shifted the focus away from her. Detective Hayes and her team continued to monitor Ashley, but refocused their main efforts on Anne and Nick, whose motives and actions appeared increasingly suspicious. The investigation was nearing its conclusion, with each piece of evidence bringing them closer to the truth. On September 2nd, 2020, the Johns Creek Police Department finally identified the murderer. Anne Frisch, Steven's wife, emerged as the primary suspect. At 42, she was known for her outgoing and charismatic personality, often seen organizing community events and church gatherings. Beneath her charming exterior, Anne concealed dark secrets. Detective Sheena Hayes put together the evidence: the bloody glove with Anne's DNA, her affair with Nick Bromley, and the substantial life insurance policy. It became clear that Anne and Nick had plotted to kill Steven and use the insurance money to start a new life together. Their plan was to make the murder look like a botched burglary to deflect suspicion. The police found out that Anne had manipulated Nick by convincing him that Steven was abusive. She sent Nick frequent messages describing horrific abuse, including threats with knives and fire. This distorted narrative led Nick to agree to participate in the murder. Anne went so far as to make Nick sign a loyalty pact, using blood and other bodily fluids to seal it. The key breakthrough came during Nick's second interrogation. Under intense questioning, Nick admitted that Anne had also planned to kill him after collecting the insurance money, fearing he might betray her. This startling revelation showed Anne as a ruthless manipulator willing to eliminate anyone who obstructed her plans. On the morning of September 2nd, Detective Hayes and her team went to arrest Anne. They arrived at the Frisch residence at 8 a.m., where Anne was in the kitchen making breakfast for her children. When the police entered, Anne looked surprised but quickly hid her emotions. As the officers put her in handcuffs, she protested her innocence, insisting she was being framed. Neighbors watched in shock as Anne was escorted to the police car. The news spread rapidly through Johns Creek, leaving the community in shock. Steven's family, including his children, Beamer and Portia, were heartbroken. They struggled to understand how their mother could have committed such a terrible crime. In the days after Anne's arrest, Steven's family and friends grappled with the betrayal and loss. They were relieved that justice was being pursued but devastated by the truth. Anne's arrest marked a major turning point in the investigation. But it also left a path of emotional devastation. The once lively Frisch household was now filled with sorrow and confusion. Detective Hayes understood that the case was far from finished, as the trial would uncover more details and pose further challenges. The arrest of Anne Frisch was a key step toward achieving justice for Steven. Her trial began on November 1, 2020, attracting considerable attention from the media and the local community. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Bronco Johnson, a 45-year-old known for his tough and detail-oriented approach, argued that Anne had carefully planned Steven's murder to obtain the life insurance money and start a new life with her lover, Nick Bromley. Johnson presented a strong case, outlining the evidence: the bloody glove containing Anne's DNA, the life insurance policy, and Nick's confession about Anne's manipulation. He depicted Anne as a ruthless killer who not only planned Steven's murder, but also intended to kill Nick to cover her tracks. In contrast, the defense attorney, Sarah Mantelli, a 38-year-old recognized for her sharp intellect and determination, argued that Anne was innocent and had been framed. Mantelli contended that Nick Bromley was the true mastermind and that Anne had been manipulated by him. She emphasized Anne's involvement in the community and portrayed her as a devoted mother who would never hurt her husband. The courtroom remained tense throughout the trial. Steven's family and friends filled the courtroom, their faces reflecting a mix of anger and sorrow. They listened closely as witnesses testified and evidence was presented. The emotional impact on Steven's children was clear as they watched their mother stand trial for their father's murder. Nick Bromley testified for the prosecution, recounting his affair with Anne and their plan to kill Steven. His testimony was damaging and cast significant doubt on Anne's claims. The defense attempted to discredit Nick, portraying him as a deceitful manipulator, but his detailed account, supported by evidence, had a powerful effect on the jury. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on December 15, 2020. Anne Frisch was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted with a mix of relief and emotion as the verdict was announced. Steven's family embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces, while Anne sat motionless, her expression a blend of shock and resignation. The judge sentenced Anne to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence deemed appropriate for the brutal and premeditated nature of her crime. Anne's reaction to the sentencing was one of quiet acceptance, with no outward display of emotion. The verdict provided a sense of closure for Steven's family and friends. They felt that justice had been served, but the pain of losing Steven would linger forever. The trial's outcome profoundly impacted the Johns Creek community, serving as a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist behind closed doors. After Anne Frisch was sentenced to life in prison, the lives of everyone involved in the case began to change dramatically. The aftermath of the trial deeply affected Steven Frisch's family, the local community, and even the suspects involved in the case. Steven's children, Portia and Beamer, faced a challenging adjustment. They had lost their father and were now growing up without their mother, who was serving a life sentence. Steven's sister, Rachel, took on the responsibility of caring for the children. Living in nearby Alpharetta, Rachel stepped in to raise Portia and Beamer. While the transition was difficult, she worked hard to create a stable and loving environment for them. Local charities, including North Fulton Community Charities, provided support to help the children adjust to their new life. Nick Bromley, who had testified against Anne, faced his own repercussions. Although he was not charged with the murder, the exposure of his affair with Anne tarnished his reputation and negatively impacted his business. Clients at Nick's gym, Fitness Together, distanced themselves from him, and his once thriving personal training business suffered due to the scandal. Ashley Martin, who had been a suspect but was later cleared, also faced difficulties as a result of the case. Although she was cleared of any wrongdoing, the media attention and rumors had significantly impacted Ashley's personal and professional life. She decided to leave her job and relocate to a new city for a fresh start. There, she took a position at a new company and sought counseling to help her deal with the stress and public scrutiny. Detective Sheena Hayes, who led the investigation, continued her work with the Johns Creek Police Department. The case was a significant milestone in her career, and she used her experience to tackle other complex cases. Her dedication to justice remained steadfast, and she frequently reflected on how the case had shaped her life and career. In the end, while justice was served for Steven Frisch, the repercussions of his murder and the subsequent trial impacted many lives. The community began to heal over time, but the memory of Steven and the lessons learned from the case continued to influence their lives. The tragic murder revealed a web of deceit and manipulation that left a lasting mark. In a seemingly perfect community, hidden secrets led to a brutal crime that forever changed the lives of those involved. Join us next time on Truthsful Crime as we delve into more stories of mystery and intrigue. Thank you for listening.